All right, we're in Exodus chapters 7 through 12. The first question reads, of the 10 plagues, list those that were directly stated to have not affected everyone. Now, we can assume that all of them were not affecting the Israelites, but there are 5 of them that were explicitly stated to not affect everyone. The first one that we want to look at is in Exodus chapter 8, verse 22. That's the one that's mentioned in the example. This is talking about the plague of the flies. And it says, on that day, I will deal differently with the land of Goshen. Verse 23, I will make a distinction between my people and your people, Pharaoh. This miraculous sign will occur tomorrow. So explicitly stated to be different, that it would not affect the Israelites, though it affected the Egyptians. The next one in chapter 9, the plague against the livestock. Verse 4, but the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt. So that's the second one we see here, that it only affected the Egyptians and not the Israelites. The third one, we skip over the boils and go to the plague of the hail in chapter 9 as well. Verse 26 says, the only place it did not hail was in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were. But this one's interesting and different from the other ones. If we jump back up to verse 19, Moses tells Pharaoh, give an order now to bring your livestock and everything you have in the field to a place of shelter, because the hail will fall on every man and animal that has not been brought in and is still out in the field, and they will die. Verse 20 says, those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside. But those who ignored the word of the Lord left their slaves and livestock in the field. And of course, the plague happened, and those who left their livestock and slaves out lost their livestock and their slaves. That's the third one. The next one in chapter 10, looking at verse 23, talking about the plague of darkness. No one could see anyone else or leave his place for 3 days, yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. That's the fourth. And then the fifth one is the plague of the firstborn, the killing of the firstborn, chapter 11, verse 7. But among the Israelites, not a dog will bark at any man or animal. Then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. These 5 plagues are explicitly stated to have not affected everyone. But look at the next question. Of these, list the determining factor for whether an individual was affected or not. And the example given is that it's whether they were Israel. Of the 5, 3 of them are just like that one in chapter 8, verses 22 and 23. That it's just a direct distinction that God would make between the Israels and not. Number 3, question 3, which of these determining factors was something the individual did? So the 3 that were just the Israelites, if you're Israelite or not, that was the determining factor there. There were the other 2. Of course, we know most notably the plague of the firstborn. You had to put the blood on your door, and the Israelites were told to put the blood on their door of the lamb that they had killed and eaten in their homes, and that would be the determining factor. But that other one that I spent a little time on, the plague in chapter 9 of the the plague of the hail, where those who brought in their slaves and their livestock, they were not affected. So we have 3 where it's just a direct distinction, Israelites and not. Then we have these 2 where the individuals had to do something. And that's going into number 3 again. Which of these determining factors was something that he did? But number 4 is for each of the plagues where the determining factor was something the individual did, those 2 that we looked at, list what an individual had to do to be delivered and also how they knew what to do. As I mentioned, those who brought in their slaves and livestock were not affected by the hail. Those Israelites who put the blood on their door were not affected. But there's something important here. How did they know what to do? In chapter 9, looking at the plague of the hail, as I mentioned, Moses told Pharaoh this, and then his officials in verse 20 says, those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord, they hurried to bring in their slaves and their livestock. So they overheard Moses giving this to Pharaoh, this general truth, this revelation, and that's how they knew. There's a difference though. In chapter 12, it says very explicitly in verse 3, God speaking to Moses says, tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. And so this command, this instruction, this truth was only given to the Israelites. No officials of Pharaoh, no other Egyptians would have heard this, only those who are Israelites. Now, of course, there could have been Egyptians who had joined the people of Israel by circumcision and maybe had seen the power of God shown through these plagues and joined them by circumcision. That's listed in the end of chapter 12. It actually explicitly says that if a person wants to join them, all their males must be circumcised. That's verse 48. Any alien living among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover must have all the males in his household circumcised. Then he may take part like one born in the land. So there was the possibility of Egyptians joining them. But explicitly, though, this command was given only to the Jews, to the Israelites, and perhaps Egyptians who had joined them, only to the people of God. And so we see here a way that God delivers his people. Question 5, did everyone know what could be done to be delivered? No, in either of these cases. And the 6th one, how can this help us better understand the different ways God delivers us? Many times in the Bible, we see the way God provides deliverance is by communicating or revealing through some means truth by which his people may be delivered. Truth by which his people may be delivered. That deliverance may be through some miraculous means, or that may just be through a simple understanding, interpretation. Most recently, we see in Genesis, how was it that Egypt and all the surrounding nations were delivered from the famine that was coming on the land? It was because God revealed the truth to Pharaoh that there was a famine. Of course, that was interpreted by Joseph. But we see here the way that God delivered was not by some miraculously providing of grain during the famine, but he delivered them by revealing truth. He let them know the times that were at hand and what they needed to do as a result. And we see this as a theme that goes throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament, that God reveals truth and tells people how they may be delivered in times of calamity or in times of trouble. But there's also another interesting point that this experience reveals, is that the way and the timing and the people to whom God reveals that truth is sometimes different. Sometimes God reveals these truths generally, and everyone can hear these truths. And as we see in the cases of the officials of Pharaoh, those who fear God among the people will accept God's truth and will walk in it. But those who do not fear will reject that truth and they will not be delivered. But then we see a kind of truths and kind of deliverance that God provides only for his people. That's what we see there in the Passover. The command was given only to the Israelites. None of the Egyptians knew the truth and the means by which they may be delivered. And so none of them, of course, could partake in that deliverance. This is the kind of deliverance I want to briefly mention and suggest, and you can look at it for yourself and see if you agree. This is the kind of deliverance I believe that God is providing for his people in the end of time. You turn to the book of Revelation, chapter 1, the very first verse. It says, this is the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show, not to the world, not to everyone in general, but to show his servants, God's servants, Jesus' servants, what must soon take place. He's revealing to them the truth about what must take place soon. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John. And in the end of verse 3, he says that the time is near. And so the way that God is choosing to reveal truth in the last days and to grant deliverance to his people is by giving them truth, giving them special truths. And he signifies, he made it in symbols, in types, in parables, in a way that only his servants who have taken time with his spirit and searched the word of God, who understand spiritual things, and so they can discern spiritual things, those his servants, those his people are able to understand what he's revealing and the means by which we may be delivered in these last and evil days. And so I believe this is just a brief illustration, a summary of the way that God is trying to communicate to his people. That yes, in the end times, it's those who trust in him who will be delivered, but the way that they will be delivered is by searching his word and receiving, understanding, knowing, embodying, imbibing, living by the truth that God has revealed for our deliverance. So hopefully this example is an encouragement for us to give ourselves, yes, to increasing our trust in God, but increasing also our understanding and reception of the truth that he has given for us in these days.